Welcome, and Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And I'm going to turn to the Torah T'mimah for today. Okay, here we are. At this point, you should see it. So you may remember yesterday, Judith had asked about the Yetzer, that word Yetzer, and I did look it up. I just looked it up in the Jastrow Dictionary, and the way they interpret it in the Jastrow Dictionary is again, the word Yatzar is in fact a verb used for how a potter shapes the clay, right? So shape, formation, and then it becomes the formation of thoughts. Yetzer machshavot, the formation of thoughts, the bent of mind, inclination, desire, etc. So that's how. So Yetzer machshavot is how the formation of his thoughts are wicked all the day, and that's that story there. So we looked at here at this particular passage. I'll just find it for you. Excuse me one moment. Uh, hmm, right here, right? And we were talking about this word vaYinacheim, right, which can mean either regretted or found comfort. And we had Rav Dimi's opinion, who translates this vaYinachem in this verse. And again, let me go back to the actual verse itself, right? vaYinachem Hashem. So vaYinachem Hashem, ki asa, that he had made. Going to the next part of it. Sorry. Et ha'adam ba'aretz, that he made man in the earth, right? Not al haaretz, not on the earth, but in the earth. Vayitatzev elibo, and he was saddened. Okay, so what is the ba'aretz? So Rav Dimi understands it as that God took comfort in the fact that he had created a place for man in the land, in the earth, meaning graves. And then there's a difference of opinion here, which is cited, and that is, let me look and see. Ve'ikad Amre. So it is not, it's an anonymous opinion. There are those who say, etc. He said that he regretted it. Lo yafe asiti. I didn't do something properly. Something I didn't do it. Lo yafe. It wasn't beautiful what I made. So we never did the Torah T'mimah on this, so we're going to look at it right now. So he says, Lashon Rishon, that is to say, the first interpretation of vaYinachem. Medayek, it is noting especially the lo shayach nichum v'charata b'kadosh baruch hu, that to speak of repentance or regret, charata would be regret regarding the Holy One, blessed be He. It's not appropriate. You know, if we understand God to be the ultimate perfection, etc., the idea of God having regret doesn't make sense. Kilo ishu, and he actually cites a verse from the book of Samuel. It says, Kilo ishu vaYinachem, right? He's not a human being that he needs to regret. Umefresh, and he explains, Dehu me'inyan havkat ratzon she'avad, and we can explain it that it is of the nature of hafakat or hafkaat, although it's hafakat here the way it's spelled. I would understand that as meaning the emergence of a desire she'ibad, that he lost derech reshaim, by means of the wicked. In other words, there is a basic sense of goodwill that God has towards creation, which changes if human people are wicked. So,
I got a question.
yes.
Why can God not regret? Because, like in the first part of the Torah, it says he saw that it was good, which is kind of the opposite of regret. So if he
Well,
can have one, why can't he have the other?
is it the opposite of regret? or is it a sense of, because good there is understood as complete, right? And also, I would say, I mean, that is the basic sense. In other words, that it was capable of continuing. Because the word tov is related to this idea of completeness, partially because you can't judge whether something is good by a work in progress. There's also another sense that regret isn't, to see how good something is seems to me to be more of the nature of appreciation. And I don't know that regret and appreciation are necessarily opposites.
Okay.
They certainly do represent, the reverse feelings, regret, but appreciation is something in and of itself too. So,
Okay.
yeah. So I'm so he says Lashon Tanchumim. I think this is who. It is actually, it has the meaning in this case of this first meaning of Nichum has to do with he says Tanchumin is consolation. That this first meaning has to do with consolation. So I confess that this earlier little explanation here, mi'inyan hafakat ratzon she'avad, right? That it's the word nafa in Hebrew, it's an Aramaic, a derivative, I believe, which means to go out, right? To take out. And avad, he lost, right? So, uh, yes, so that in a sense, there it is consolation. In other words, something awful happens, but you take consolation. So I think that's what he's trying to say. Ulashon sheni, and he says the second meaning of nichum, svirale, he is of the opinion, de lashon charatahi, that in fact that nichum has to do with, it has the connotation of regret, charata, Af de mitzad HaKadosh Baruch Hu, despite the fact that from the point of view of God, of the Holy One, basically He, umisibato lo shayach charata. And I think in that case, Mesibato, I looked it up in Jastrow. There's the Jastrow reference on the page number, his dispensation. Again, regret doesn't make sense. But nevertheless, he's saying aval, but he beyachas, it has more to do el ha'adam. It's got to do with the relationship to God, to man, that it's from the human side, sheyuchal letaken ma'asav, because he is able to improve what he's doing. You know, to say that God can improve, again, that's the whole thing about perfection, is that to improve something is again another meaning of maybe the original meaning of to perfect. But to say that the implication is that if you can improve it, it must have had some defect to it to begin with so that you could improve it. And that's why it doesn't work with God. But it does, it's whether he's saying right here that it's an anthropomorphism, okay. Um, but I'll keep going. But Azmi Mela, and so automatically Nishtane Inyano. So God, I think Inyano is referring to, I'm trying to think, is whether this refers to human beings or whether it's referring to God. Okay. Um, so I think, as I'm reflecting on this and trying to understand it, I'm thinking that he is speaking about human beings here. So when he says that God regretted, it isn't so much that God regretted, okay, but has to do with the nature of human beings and the fact that they are capable of improving, and they didn't, okay, or they weren't. So that saying God regretted isn't talking about God. And I believe we covered this yesterday, right? But it's speaking more of the point of view of the relationship that God has to human beings and their side of the equation. Ukamo b'ma'aseh ha'egel, right? And for example, the Maaseh Ha'egel in the incident of the golden calf, sheshavu b'tshuvah shlema, right? In that case, where the people were truly and sincerely in a state of repentance for what they had done, mimela husav nitiyat Hakadosh Baruch Hu alehem letovah. So again, automatically, the relationship that God has towards the Israelites at that moment was went towards good. So again, it's not so much talking about God, but in the fact that as human beings, when our relationship to God changes as depending on our behavior, and it's dependent on our behavior. Ushnehem, and he says now both interpretations of the word nichum, vaYinacheim, they come from an analysis milat ba'aretz, from this word ba'aretz, in the earth. Below al haaretz. In other words, as I said, that he had created man in the earth, and it doesn't say on the earth. The hakavana al kfarim, because in that particular case, the intention the intent is regarding graves. So ba'aretz there is understood as referring to graves. So we're going to go on now to the very last Torah T'mimah on this Parsha of Bereshit. And Bart, this has to do with a question you raised yesterday. But
Yeah.
Noah matzah, but Noah found grace. Tana debe Rabbi Yishmael. It was taught in the school of Rabbi Yishmael. Af al Noach nechtam gzar din. Regarding Noah, also the decree was sealed, meaning to be destroyed. Ella, however, shematzachen, he was able to find grace. Shene'emar, as it says, nichamti ki asitim. This is in this last little part where God says, nichamti, that I have made them. V'noach matzachen be'inei Hashem. However, Noah found grace in the eyes of God. So here it is, right? Right here. Ki nichamti ki asitim, right? I don't know that we read this verse. Vayomer Hashem, and the Lord thought to, Emche et Adam, I will blot out humans, Asher barati, whom I created, Me'al pnei ha'adamah. So here we go from off the surface of the earth, Me Adam, from humans ad behemah to cattle ad remis to I believe this is the creeping things, ad of hashamayim, including the birds of the sky. Ki nichamti ki asitim, and there is this word nichamti ki asitim, right? And there again, are we going to translate it as here as regret? It certainly sounds like it here. And the very next sentence is V'noach matzachen b'nei Hashem. But Noah found favor, grace in the eyes of God. So,
What are the three P's?
this is telling you that it's the end of the parsha.
Ah, okay.
That the next parsha is going to start, because the next parsha actually starts, I believe, with verse 9, and we can take a look. Here we go. See, verse 9. That's because the verse numbers were actually something that were devised by Christian scholars. So, but no, so here we go. Let's keep going on. Right. Okay. On to this Torah T'mimah. Smichut ha'inyanim darish. The reason he says this is because he connects these two parts of the verse. In other words, he connects the fact that God is ready to wipe out humanity, and then it goes on to say, but Noah found grace. And the whole issue of grace he's going to discuss here. So I'll let him speak. V'ratzor lomar, and what he wants to say is, shegam Noach lo haya ra'ui lehinatzel, that Noah too was not worthy of being saved. Ela shematzachen, but however he found grace. V'nafka lechein, and he derives this. There's this word nafak. You see, he draws it out from milashon chen, from this very term chen, which we translate as grace, I think accurately, sheyunach al hanotel davar she'en ra'ui lo, which refers to something or someone who takes something which he doesn't deserve. It isn't that it's coming to him mitzad atzmo, on account of himself, or mitzad hadin, or by way of justice, the hayosher, or equity, ela rak, but it only comes mitzad hachesed. It only comes from the nature of mercy or kindness, the chanina. That I think we can translate as mercy, mitzad hanaten, from the one who gives. So, for example, so the grace, the whole notion of grace is that it's undeserved kindness. It's undeserved, and yet you nevertheless get it. And that's why we talk about a grace period. In other words, the deadline is February 1st, say, but you have a grace period in February 10th. So that even though by rights, if you didn't get it in by February 1st, you should be penalized for it. Nevertheless, you're given a little moment longer to be able to take longer than February 1st. And that's not because you deserve it. It is purely on the part of the people setting the rules. And so likewise here, Noah did not deserve to survive. It was purely an act of sheer grace on the part of God. Ukamo shekatuv bivrachot zayin aleph. He's referring now to the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, page 7a. V'chanoti asher achon, where God says to Moses, I shall show grace to the one I will show grace. And the comment there is afal pi she'enor ra'oi, even though this person doesn't deserve it. Sifrei Parshat Naso, and in the Sifrei regarding to the Parsha, Sifrei is a midrash on the books of Numbers and Deuteronomy. In this case, Naso, which is in the book of Numbers. Darshu Vichuneka. Remember, in Parshat Naso, we find the priestly benediction. If someone is not muted, please check because I can hear sounds coming. So please consider muting. So it says, remember, the in the priestly benediction, it uses the term Ya'er Hashem panav elecha vichuneka. So what about this vichuneka? Sheyiten lecha. We understand that God will give you matnat chinam, an undeserved gift. So again, that in this blessing that you should receive grace from God. Uvenusach birkat hamazon, and we notice also in the birkat hamazon, the grace after meals, it says Hazan et haolam, who feeds the world, who sustains the world, kulo betuvo. Okay, so Hazan et haolam kulo betuvo, the entire world betuvo, right? In or completely in his goodness, Bechain, and describing that as Bechain, through grace, Bechesed, through kindness, Uverachamim, and with mercy. Kibetz kol midot havitur. So in that case, using those three terms as to how God sustains the world, that blessing combines all those aspects, all those qualities of the way in which God is not exacting punishment and judgment on human behavior. And this is something we've talked about before as to how we look at ourselves as, to a very great extent, as undeserving, the very reverse of entitlement, right? So there is an attitude of entitlement. This is the absolute opposite. V'Iyen od, he says, and check further, Masha Katuv b'inyan drashazo, what is written regarding this particular interpretation, Lekaman, below, Rosh Parshat Noach, at the beginning of the next Parsha of Noach. So it looks like probably could be Pasuk Yud Gimel. Let's see, what chapter are we on right now? Yeah, so it could be Perik Yud Gimel, it could be chapter 13, and Ot Chet, and that would be the number 8. And the Ot Chet could refer to the reference here, these numbers here. Okay. One little last comment, he says, V'da, and you and know also that tzarich lomar, that you'd have to say, de hadoresh hazeh, that the one who gives this interpretation, that is, that Noah only survived because of the grace that God showed him. Svirale, he is of the opinion, Deman Kamanda Amar Lakaman, like the opinion below that's going to be mentioned, Reish Parshat Noach, at the beginning of Parsha of Noach. Tzadik Tamim Haya Bedortav. There's a verse that says he was completely righteous in his generations, right? Bedorotav Lignai. So they understand in his generations that Noah was completely righteous in his generations. That word in his generations is understood as a criticism. As a criticism. To explain, She'im Haya Bedoro Shel Avraham, that had Noah lived in the generation of Abraham, Lo Haita Nechshavet Tzidkato, that his righteousness, quote unquote, wouldn't have even been taken into consideration. But compared to his generation, Noah was righteous. And that's why it's saying he was righteous in his generation. That's why it adds the words in generation. I'll just keep going. Ulefize, and according to this, uh, uh, techonen klal drashazo. You can find now the basis of this particular interpretation that we have here. Masha enokein. This would not apply. We wouldn't be able to use this interpretation, Lamandamar, to the one who disagrees but with that interpretation of Bedorotav in his generations, Lamanda Amar Bedorotav Leshevach, that the reason it mentions in his generations that Noah was righteous in his generations should be understood as praise of Noah, as additional praise of Noah. Hare lo haya chaser lo kol me'uma lemalat hatzadik. The fact that despite the wickedness of his generations, in other words, despite his generations, he did not lack any quality whatsoever of being a righteous person. And to say that he was righteous despite the fact that everyone in his generation was wicked is saying a great deal about him. Imkain, and if this is the case, lama nidrosh bignuto, right? And if this is the case, why would we have to interpret that saying in his generations was speaking as a criticism of him? Shegam alav nechtam gzardin. In other words, why would we say that the edict was had also against him, ella shematzachen, but rather that he found grace. So that's the last little comment on Parshat Bereshit on of the Torah T'mimah. And I'm going to stop the share with this, and in case any of you would like to comment. Any thoughts? So, okay. So again, Baruch Halevi Epstein, Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein, just shows his keen mind and how he can learn from one interpretation and how it's based, etc., etc. So, and we'll stop the lesson with this. I'll stop the recording.